Welcome everyone to this month's episode of the Red Team podcast. We had a little delay past couple of weeks with project work coming up and all sorts of cool things happening internally here on the Red Team, but we're happy to be joined today alongside Thomas and Rob. We are missing some people from the team who unfortunately couldn't make it today, but as they say, this show goes on. What's up, guys?
Yo,
Hold
yo.
on.
They keep us busy, but they can't keep us away
They can't
from
keep
the
us
pod.
away. Yeah, how are your cortisol levels today, Thomas?
Yeah, I would say they're lower than they were last week. Brandon and I had a physical breach that we were doing together, which we found a lot of good stuff. The blue team found us, which obviously always makes things more exciting. But I'm calmer. I'm calmer. I feel nice and relaxed behind my desk this week.
We don't have 8 police officers and a bunch of guns pointed at our face.
Exactly.
So there's a lot going on in the offensive security space these days. I mean, we had a news article that came out not too long ago about how Microsoft has been attributing threat actors. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. So, Dad, you're, I assume, referring to the GDID attribution. Yeah. So, I personally think this one's really interesting. A lot of people, I think, in the hacker community, more of like the gray hat kind of community, were initially really concerned about the GDID attribution because it was tied very closely to Peter Stokes' arrest. It was mentioned in the unsealed docs or public court docs about his arrest, who is one of the guys from Scattered Spider. But GDIDs themselves, pretty normal thing. I think it was kind of interesting that a lot of people were like, oh my God, Microsoft knows every single thing that you're doing, when in reality the GDIDs, well, they're kind of hard to shed on one machine. It's hard to get them completely reset. It's kind of a standard device identifier, and if you're using the internet like with Edge and it's voluntarily submitting your GDID, then of course your attribution is going to be a lot easier to connect back to you. That's how I felt about it. I thought it was,
Did you guys actually know about that? I always assumed there was something like specific like that, but I never actually knew what it was or what it was called.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was called either. I think this is like one of the first, I think a big part of the issue is that like why people were worried is this is the first time that Microsoft has talked about it. Like it's on their Azure docs mentioned as an optional internal like telemetry signifier.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And it's like, but nobody really knew what it was. It's kind of functionally the same as, I guess, passport UIDs, which are more discussed openly. But yeah, it was really odd that it was like, oh, this is the first time you're actually hearing about this publicly, and it's not even from Microsoft, it's from a court document.
Yeah, it makes you think that, makes you wonder, a lot of the activities that you pursue online, you think are fully anonymous, but not so much, especially when it's tied to your device at the hardware level. And then when you start doing, you start investigating and attributing that GDID to where, other telemetry that exists out there on the open web, it's not so as anonymous as you think it is. Even, I was reading the article earlier today, even though he was using a VPN to obscure his IP, that GDID was associated to some logins that he had put his Facebook or Snapchat or something
Just
he had
bad
logged
OpSec
into.
all around.
Yeah, it was really bad OpSec. I mean, I saw, I guess he posted on his Snapchat a picture of his test, because the guy was 16 years old, so he posted a
Please,
whatever
19.
whatever exam he was taking at the time with his full name, and because they attributed that to the GDID and or to the IP, and the IP to the GDID, and that to other nefarious activity he was doing over the span of his cyber criminal career, that's kind of how he got busted.
I mean, totally anecdotally, from what I know about a lot of the cyber criminal groups that I've heard about and, tangentially encountered in the wild, he's from the comm, but it seems like a lot of people who do that sort of big OpSec fails for a non-affiliated hacking group, a lot of them tend to be young kids, which is kind of interesting. People who are mastering the skill, but then are like, where can I use this? I guess just on anything that's broken.
And it goes to show that, the motives of attackers have changed over the years. When I was that age, younger as well, the motives weren't for hacking companies for financial gain. It was look at what I can do for the lulz, right?
Yep.
Right.
That was the whole vibe back then.
Right?
Yeah.
But now, as our reliance on technology becomes increased, everything's becoming digitized. The motives of attackers have changed as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting to me with so again, also young kids, presumably, right? It seems like young kids are part of shiny hunters because the Pokemon reference in the name. But I feel like
I didn't know
I
that.
feel like a lot of the techniques between shiny hunters and a scattered spider are similar because like they both have been associated with the technique of you call into an IT team or you call into an individual for a company, you impersonate IT or that individual, and then you reset their password. And from there, they're kind of everywhere in the network, right? Because a lot of the places that they target, either they can get some sort of VPN access or they don't need it to do what they want to do for basically extortion, right? And it's interesting because we have seen that as a thing that clients are interested in, and we are interested in modeling, which is, hey, can we just call people and reset the passwords? And I feel like you have had a lot of success with that, Brandon. I feel like you've done a lot of those calls before.
Yeah, it's pretty wild because like at the end of the day, you could have all the bells and whistles in the world. If you could literally go to Black Hat or go to RSA, buy one of every product from every vendor, but at the end of the day, like the human will always be the weakest link, and all it takes is one. You can call a million times, but you only need to get one person to do it, right? Whether it's resetting a password or downloading a file and opening it on their workstation, the human will always be the weakest link. And it goes to show you that you don't need to have sophisticated malware and backdoors and all sorts of things, things along those lines. The attacks are becoming less and less technical. And because the barriers to entry are significantly lower, it enables threat actors who are 13, 14, 15, in their teenage years to easily just catch
Yeah.
on and just pick up a phone and just BS their way through, the IT help desk to claim someone they're not. And yeah, if you pop the right guy's account, you essentially have the keys to the kingdom, like the MGM hack. I think they went on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
found, people's names, found the guy who is like a network engineer or whatever his like actual title was. But yeah, he was highly privileged in the organization, called the IT help desk saying, hey, I reset my password due to, I guess, gaps in their, technical process, in their processes that either they didn't have established or they just didn't adhere to. They were able to reset the guy's cred because he didn't have MFA enabled, which is crazy if you're like that high in that like privileged in the network. You would imagine you'd have MFA
You'd
enabled on your
imagine,
account,
right? Yeah, not
or
always.
Why we have
or
a job, Brandon?
or at least like separation of privileges. At least like move his domain admin account onto something else that is secure to have his normal account. But yeah, I guess just by exploiting that human factor and also a lapse of proper technical controls, they had the keys to the kingdom to pull off this hack and brought an organization as large as MGM is to their knees. Like people couldn't check into their hotels, couldn't gamble, couldn't just shut down their business.
So I have a
Yeah.
question for both of you guys because like I think a lot of like the way the framing of these sorts of issues has been presented like in the news, especially after AI, like AI accelerated vulnerability research. I think there's a lot of talk about like a kill chain and like time to compromise also shrinking. But I don't know if that's really necessarily true when it comes to like taking over a whole network, because obviously like once you get into a network, you have access to whatever the user that you're in that network has access to. But I feel like the real time constraint is like if you're going after something specific is like mapping the network topography and finding out where you want to go. And there's still a lot of attackers, I would imagine, that are sitting low and slow. And I feel like we kind of do both models, right? Like sometimes we are trying to move really fast, sometimes we're trying to sit back. What do you guys feel about that? Like, do you feel like that seems true that the time to kill chain time is going down? Kill chain. I hate that term, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I will say though, with like AI and stuff, it's incredibly helpful. It's like having a whole team of people like working with you. So like
Yeah.
you trying to research stuff, you trying to figure out how these tools work, building tools on the fly, like all of that time is completely gone. So I
Yeah.
would say it definitely accelerates it when you want it to be accelerated. Sometimes, like you said, you don't want to be fast, you want to be slow. But in that slow time, now you have time to do research and do other things and figure out your next steps before actually executing. So I think it kind of works.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really compressing the attackers' timelines. Right. I feel like obviously when I'm harnessing AI to do whatever it is I'm doing, I feel like Superman these days. It's like the
Yeah, seriously.
superpower unlocked.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
especially like
Addicting.
yeah, I mean if you know how if you understand like the fundamental technology, how it works under the hood, and then it really acts as a force multiplier and enabling you to just do more in less time. And when you apply that operationally towards whatever it is we're working on, engagements or tool development or exploit research or whatever it is, yeah, I feel like Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do like go ahead, Ron.
I was gonna say, it also makes me feel like we're getting lazier at the same time. Like, how often you guys actually, like, reviewing PRs and stuff and, like, looking at the code that it's writing? Like, it's getting, like,
Right.
smaller and smaller, I feel like, every time,
Yeah.
the more stuff we push out.
I feel like I intentionally like as it's become so easy to like look up the latest and greatest, like, hey, here's a vuln that just drops. Here's a PSE for it. Like, I feel like I now actually like am forcing myself to read more, maybe even than I did before. Cause
Yeah,
I think a lot of us have that fear that like, hey, if we're not the masters of our domain, what's the point of, interacting with the AI? Maybe the AI could just do the thing we're doing if we're not actually doing the proper research to steer it correctly.
yeah, we also can tell it, they explain this to me, "How does this work?" Like, "Teach me."
Yeah.
That's how I like to use it. I don't like having it do everything for me, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do like the analogy of like, working with AI as if it's like a team of,
Yeah,
either juniors or experts, potentially, depending on how well trained it is, right? Like being able to ask a question and have an answer to it is more valuable, I think, than like, oh, hey, write this script for me, right? Like being able to say, what is the service that I'm talking to? Like, where are the API docs for that?
yeah.
It's really
So,
fascinating too if you put it into like the appropriate harness or like a loop that essentially grades itself, right? Any AI generated code I have goes into like a loop that reviews it, tests it, validates it
yeah,
against
that's
an
the only way
entire
to use it.
rubric, and yeah, essentially, it runs itself at this point for the most part.
So that's actually interesting that you brought that up because literally that's pretty much what I do too. But I did find a use case where that would not work. So me and Raf were actually working on fixing our red team EDR lab. So we basically ran out of space and we need to, change the partitions, move stuff around, like a lot of like very tedious work. And if you did one thing wrong, the entire thing's gonna blow up. It's gonna be really hard to fix it. So I basically had to follow like write up the script. Here's all the stuff, log in, check all the things, give me all the exact commands, give me a playbook, and I want to run it myself. Because Raf's like, I'm not letting Claude do it. I want to run this myself. So give me the actual commands, we'll look it up, we'll double check everything. And sure enough, all the commands are almost perfect, except it gave us the wrong like device name. It was supposed to be like 01 instead of 02. So literally, if we let him do it, it would have blew up the entire thing. It would have broke. There would
God.
be no loop. There would be no easy way to go back and fix it.
Yeah.
Make no mistakes.
Yeah.
Step one failed.
So you got to be careful.
You gotta
Yeah.
add the make no mistakes in the prompt.
Mm.
Rule number one.
I saw an interesting thing. This is a total aside about AI, but I did see an interesting thing where somebody raised that exact same problem where they had Claude delete like their entire database or something. And they asked Sol 5.6, they're like, hey, what did I do wrong? And it's like, well, first up, you didn't make backups of anything. And it's like,
Yeah.
you really needed the AI to tell you that? Like, I feel like you could have puzzled that one out yourself.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So our first Claude plan did not have a backup, and I actually did a cross review with GPT, and it's like, yeah, the first thing you should probably do is back all this stuff up and take it off disk first. Like, that's smart.
A
Or
new
like we're just
approach
offloading it.
a new approach I've been doing is essentially having the two coding harnesses work together. One
Yeah,
cross
same.
check, well, like taking a prompt of whatever the prompt is, throwing it at the other harness, and they both cross check and evaluate each other's work, and then take that and synthesize the results and have take an adversarial agent review of that work to cross check and ensure its accuracy. I found a lot of success in that and ensuring, because you get like both perspectives, right? Each model with each coding harness obviously acts a little bit differently, but the underlying models are trained differently. They have different training data sets and allows them to have different perspectives in how they approach things. But yeah, taking that like dual harness approach, I personally have found to be really effective and like
Yeah,
things I work on.
I've been using the Codex plugin for Claude Code, which has been really nice. It makes it super easy.
So what do you,
So, I mean, Rob, you got to tell us about the testing harness for Mythic.
Yeah. So I've definitely been spending quite a bit of time in our private Mythic fork. So recently, I wrote up a blog to kind of go through, the pain and the sorrow and the joy that this whole process has brought us. So this was almost a year ago today we started this. So I just tried to give it you guys a TLDR. It's a little bit long, but I'll just try to
oh, we got
get to the
time.
good stuff. Okay. So basically, go back like a year. The problem we were having is essentially our existing loaders, the commercial C2, everything we were using was all getting flagged. We were doing kind of service level customization, was working for a little bit, and eventually it just didn't work. So we were getting stuck. We had nothing to send clients. We had nothing, everything was just broken. So we had a big hardened financial client coming up, and they basically told us what the EDR was. They told us they have app whitelisting. We're just like, we had
Yeah.
nothing that's going to work against this. Like, we have
We
2 weeks to figure
we
something out.
knew going in like this is dead in the water. Like we don't have a solution for it, and this is like
Yeah.
what, like February last year.
Yeah. So our options at the time were start, greenfield, do something totally brand new, which we just didn't have the time to do, test and make it actually work. The other option was to maybe do an internal fork of Sliver. I looked at that and I was like, it's not really going to be as easy because I wanted something very small, like a stage zero with like no, very, very minimal IOCs, the very basics. And to do that with Sliver would have pretty much had to rewrite the entire thing. So I was like, all right, that's kind of out. So the other thing I looked at was Mythic. So one of our colleagues went over to SpectreOps and like, you have to check out Mythic. It's super cool. Modular architecture, extensible, full ecosystem of agents. So I checked it out. Super complicated, very hard to set up. Once I actually dug into like one of the main agents, which was Apollo, it was a .NET agent, and it had some really, really cool features. I was like, we can definitely use this. So for like app whitelisting specifically, we tried app domain manager injection and MS build XML payloads. So that would have worked perfect. So the next thing was basically getting this open source agent to actually work against like modern EDR, which was not easy.
Yeah,
So
all the good
basically,
stuff was not out there for us to just pick up and use.
yeah, I was like, this is when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. I was like, we had Elastic in the lab at the time. So we spun that up, tried to test it again. So I was like, all right, here's the things that are getting caught. Elastic, they literally publish all the YARA rules. So like, all right, let's just go download the rules, change all the strings, ship it. But the strings weren't cosmetic. These were load bearing strings. So the actual Mythic protocol structures. So we had to go back and actually change the Mythic server code, which is a whole other thing. So I had to learn just Mythic server code. We had to learn the new .NET code, make it all work, modify it. Hopefully, try to fix it. Kind of worked a little bit, but then we hit the feature velocity problem. So essentially how Apollo works is it compiles the task module server side. So it just pushes DLL bytes to the agent via assembly.load. So every new capability we tried to do, had to be manually vetted. There was no systematic approach. It was inconsistent. Like we're just trying to build these new things and it was just breaking all the time. So we also found out things like the namespaces, like the word Apollo itself was a trigger. So it's like we can't just manually change this stuff every single op, manually. It's just not going to work. So the solution at the time was we need to build some kind of obfuscation pass, like a build time obfuscation. So something that's programmatic, consistent, repeatable. So that's when I started to work on the .NET obfuscator repository. So that was my first real big vibe coding project. That's kind of where this whole thing started. So why did we do that? Because you can't use, there's a bunch of different .NET obfuscators, EDR vendors are trained on their output. So if you just take Apollo and send it through something like ConfuserX, it doesn't look like Apollo anymore, but it just looks like malware that was processed by ConfuserX.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really help you at all. So the whole design principle of trying to obfuscate was essentially, obfuscate this, but also make it look like a legitimate .NET enterprise app, not like malware. So high level for the obfuscator, it did things like symbol renaming. So instead of giving it like random hex names, we use like a realistic name generator. So like 450 plus lists of actual names that we probably would show up in binaries. We did things like string encryption, like rolling XOR with per random build seeds and all that stuff to basically hide all the C2 traffic and all that. We did metadata cleanup. So stripping compiler attributes, removing IL repack artifacts, rewriting the PE version, like pretty much everything. So when this was done, the files actually looked like real programs. So the key point here is it was per build randomization. Any fixed output is just a signature with extra steps, essentially. So
at that point,
like
I'm just curious. At that point, while you were working on it, were you like doing any packing or compression, or were you basically just saying like, I'm going to get this as thin as possible without doing anything like that at all?
Yeah. So I was just trying to get it as thin as possible without that. I didn't want to pack it. I didn't want to encrypt it. Malware pretty much all looks the same. So if you do all these things, it's going to look like malware.
Yeah.
And the thing with Apollo was it had the dynamic loading feature. A lot of agents didn't have that. So you didn't have to put all your Kerberos and LDAP and all this stuff in the base agent. You could just load it later, which is really cool, but it turned into be an absolute nightmare to actually integrate obfuscation with that feature. So the next problem was the assembly merge problem. So Apollo was initially shipped with Custera. So essentially that just embeds all the dependencies. So all the DLLs and all that stuff gets embedded as compressed resources. When we ran that through the obfuscator, we saw a huge problem. Only the outer assembly got transformed. So essentially, the main binary actually got obfuscated, but all the DLLs and stuff inside still had Apollo.interop and all this other stuff.
Awesome.
So you didn't really gain much. So initially I tried just obfuscating each DLL separately, but at the time there was no shared rename maps. So all the types diverged between assemblies, runtime resolution broke. It was a nightmare. The things like, component 123 would look for, Apollo interop still calling iAgent instead of Apollo interop, whatever. So the solution there was get rid of Custera and I replaced it with IL repack. So that essentially takes all the DLLs after they're compiled and it merges them into one single binary. So then when you actually run obfuscation on it, it obfuscates everything. So that is one problem that we solved.
Is that around the time that I remember, because we pretty much at the time had only like DLL side loading or, MS build as a mechanism for deploying stuff. And I remember at the time you were like, hey, I think a single binary for some of these payloads is going to be functional. Is that around that time?
Yeah, I think it was around that time.
Gotcha.
Yeah. No, yeah. But basically, once we've got that all kind of figured out and working, then we figured out that all the dynamic loading broke. So when you basically compile these DLLs, against the non-obfuscated binary, you can't load them into it. They all have to be able to match each other because all the namespaces are going to be obfuscated differently. So the solution there was to build a whole obfuscation map system. So it's basically a big JSON file that persisted in the Mythics database, and that was called every time a DLL got compiled to actually
Got it.
ingest correctly into
Yeah, to tell it where to
the
go. Yeah,
main
yeah, yeah.
assembly. Yeah.
Got it.
So that was like a whole thing. That was probably one of the single like hardest parts of this entire journey was trying to get that complicated thing to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, so lessons learned was basically, Apollo was designed as a training tool. Readable names, namespace based, discovery, reflection by name, all reasonable for that specific purpose. But they were literally all load bearing walls that we had to try to retrofit heavy obfuscation into. So it was kind of a nightmare. So the big takeaways from the whole blog is, design obfuscation from day one. Define the symbol contracts before you write the first handler. Treat the obfuscator as detection service. Looks obfuscated is itself a detection. So you can't really just, obfuscate everything. Per build randomization, but again, consistency is your enemy. If you build the same thing every time, it's very easy to signature that stuff. And the other two are, budget for the pipeline, not just the payload. So we basically budgeted for the payload, and it really kicked us at the end. We
Yeah.
didn't really think about like putting a full engineering CI/CD process behind this. We do now, but like back then, we just didn't even have the foresight to do that. And the last thing is just knowing when to stop fighting the forks. So we probably crossed that line a lot earlier than we admitted.
Yeah.
But when we did, we figured it out, we moved on. So the whole, blog post number 2 is going to be kind of talking about the engineering side of this. And we're probably going to be releasing like an open source MCP server suite that I use for my really tight dev loops.
Nice.
So essentially that was basically, it was kind of a pain to constantly make changes, then rebuild the container, test it, rebuild the container, test it, and it was all very manual. So all of that was all automated. And now you can literally just give, Claude, say, hey, add this new LDAP feature to Apollo, and it'll just build it, test it, deploy it, execute it, run it, and just go into a loop until it works. And then when it's done, it's like, here you go, here's your PR.
Man, I also remember when you got the, because like all of the stuff that you did for Apollo and then our, private agents, incredible on the Windows side. I remember I loved, like at the time I was trying to find like scripting language payloads, like Medusa that would work in an environment, because that to me has always been so easy and it flies under the radar of a lot of EDRs. And when you got Medusa working too, because that's another thing that Rob was doing as part of this, was just like kind of tweaking all the different payloads that were bog standard in Mythic. When you got that SOX proxy working so well, I was like, oh my God, I've fallen in love with this payload. Like I have to just use if there's Python, I will use Medusa and Hera as well, because it's just like, oh, come on, why not?
Yeah, and the SOC stuff, I spent probably more time on getting the SOCs like performing and working under our crazy red team conditions with
I
like the
know.
Nginx forwarder and all this other like stuff we
Yeah.
have to do in there. But yeah, that was not easy. But it did pay off because it pretty much did it once for Apollo and it pretty much worked for all the rest of them. The same design.
Yeah.
It's amazing how far this has matured. I mean, remember like a year ago or so, you helped build a payload for me. I think it was like a loader or whatever it was. And yeah, we were just like renaming like the variable names from like, I think yours was like, let's do fruits, apples, bananas, vegetable, tomatoes. And now here we are, fast forward just a year later, and now we have an entire pipeline.
Yeah, and I just finished our whole actual end-to-end suite. So now we add a new task or whatever. We basically spin it up in the lab, run it through. It runs every single command, every single output option, all the things, and comes back and reports like, yep, past worked. Or this one feature broke this, so now we got to fix it before we push it out to prod. So that was everything. We were basically fixing the airplane while we were flying it, which wasn't fun.
Question for you. So in doing this, is there anything about the different EDR solutions? Because our lab, we test against everything that we can. Is there anything that you realize while doing this that like all of them are doing really well compared to like, what our setup was before you implemented this? Like, is there anything that like EDR jumped up at that was really kicking our butt specifically?
Yeah, I would probably say, anything that looks like malware, that you can detect it very easily. So don't look or act like malware anymore. Don't inject into processes if you don't have to. There's not really a lot of processes that do that normally. That's going to be something that's very easy to detect. Don't like try to dump LSAS. Nothing does that anymore. It's a super, highly watched thing now. There's just other ways of doing all these things now. Instead of dumping the Kerberos tickets, that's a little bit quieter. Just try to blend in. But I would say EDR is getting good. So it's really hard.
Cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
Any that are particularly, I feel like I know which ones I feel like are particularly annoying, but any that you feel like are particularly
Oh,
like,
I think
yeah.
Elastic is probably one of the best, even though I've never seen it on a real app before, but it consistently catches like everything.
Same. Yeah. I was gonna say that like Sentinel-1 seemed like the one that like had the hardest like threshold to clear, but it seems like it might be
So
Elastic.
I would say it did until we like got to actually hands on it, and then we can actually play with
Yeah.
it. Just like anything else, if you can test against it, you can get around it.
Man, it was 2 projects in a row that I think, we were working on together, and it was
We
like,
were-
how on earth are we gonna
yeah,
like, we need to do so
and
we
like
need to retool here.
and we had like the exact attack path. We just did not have a payload to actually execute it. It was so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, like, probably another thing that, like, realistically, like, big businesses are just assuming now that, "Hey, I've got that EDR that does that thing super kick ass. There's no way around it." When it's like, you've demonstrably proven, like, if you put your mind to it, you can still get around a lot of the EDR stuff, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I will say it would not have been possible without AI. So I pretty much was operating at like, we're running this payload, we run this thing, like CrowdStrike caught something, so let's fix it right now on the fly while it's fresh and then test it again before we lose access to this client. Same thing
Yeah,
in another environment. S1 caught it. All right, let's fix it now before we lose access. That would
right.
never be possible without AI.
It's really
Yeah.
compressing attackers' ability,
Yeah.
or I guess in our case, our ability to emulate attackers.
Yeah, in our case specifically, I feel like a lot of people who work in like consulting, there's a focus on like jump from one project to the next. And the people who are doing that consulting work are maybe different from the people who are actually like working on the tools. And it's cool that we on our team where we do both of those things. But before, we had AI coding assistants, it was hard to actually spend all that time to
Yeah.
really up things to the next
Impossible.
level.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's got like a dedicated dev guy to just do our engineering, 24, well, not 24/7, but 9
Yeah.
to 5,
I
right?
mean,
But
some
now,
shops
Yeah.
have that. Yeah. That's a thing.
Yeah.
But again, it's a lot of money. It's hard to prove business value.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. It's cool to be able to have both of those teams merged into one now, especially where it's like, I think pretty much everybody on the team does a little bit of dev of some kind, which is a really awesome environment to work in,
I feel like
especially
in
when,
our industry, you have to. You have to be able to do dev work. You can't
yes.
use off
Yeah.
the shelf tooling at all, ever.
No.
yeah, we'll get burnt. But yeah, it's good because I feel like pretty much everyone on our team, we have very diverse backgrounds. I mean, Rob, you're our payload specialty guy. We have Laurent, who couldn't make it today. He's our like a Windows expert. Anything cloud and Azure, he's the go-to. So yeah, we have like a very diverse pool of consultants on the team, and everyone offers their unique perspective. And taking that, applying it to whatever dev work they're working on. But when you fuse everyone together, it creates a pretty kick-ass team.
I like our team. Got some good guys.
It was,
I
it
like
was
our
funny,
team.
Rob. It was funny, Rob, that you were mentioning oh man, like I could rewrite Sliver, but I don't want to do that. And then later I'm just like, oh man, maybe AI can help me rewrite Sliver, which it did.
Yeah.
It did a pretty decent job of, but I think still kind of the mythic stuff that you've got going is the gold standard for us at the moment.
Yeah. I think that the
Well,
40 meg
yeah.
binaries were just too much. And it's like you have all of
Yes.
your
Yeah.
payload, all of your tooling in one binary, which I did love. And I couldn't think of an easy
Yeah.
way to like, do that in Go where you can actually load things dynamically. I feel like
Right.
Slimmer wasn't really made for like very specific, like stealthy red teaming. That's more of like a pen testing thing.
Yeah.
Like it's easy to set up and use, but to actually make it customizable and stuff, it's not so much.
Like you said with Apollo, like the version of Sliver that I think we have on our public repository very much feels like a learning tool, and I think it is a very great learning tool. Real EDRs, when they're looking at Sliver as it stands in the repository, of course they'll be able to catch it. So even when we have used it, and even when we use the variant that I've been working on, it's got to be completely different. Like it can't be anything like the way it looked, even just 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of surface to cover in that giant binary to cover your tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more than just customizing the C2 profile config.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And people have tried. There's definitely some like GitHub repositories where they gave like, like scripts to actually reset everything and change all like the protobuf, I think was the main one, protobuf
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Protobuf gets signatured
Yeah.
pretty aggressively. Yeah. Claude, rewrite
So,
this in Rust. Make no mistakes.
yeah. Make no mistakes.
Make no mistakes.
I find when I tell it to make no mistakes, it aggressively makes more mistakes, and I feel like it's not working for me.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Well, what else is going on? I don't know. What have we been doing? You guys been working on anything cool? Any projects?
Well, I mean, we did have that physical, and as a result, I think one of the things that I've been curious about coming out of that was basically like what we know about like Wigand, what I know, challenging my own assumptions about what I know, but then like what are the tools that we're using for scanning low frequency and high frequency badges? A lot of what I've encountered anecdotally has been low frequency badges or like really weak I class, which is high frequency badges. Not so often that you see SEOS, which is a badge type where, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, Brandon, but it's a badge type where it has high frequency that's encrypted, but the low frequency is very weakly encrypted, basic standard low frequency badge data. But I'm kind of like been interrogating this, like, okay, like what can we do? What kind of tooling can we get so that we don't have as much friction encountering a badge in the wild where we don't know what type it is? And just from the YGAN data, why can't we just mathematically immediately determine what it's going to be? And I think that some of that stuff already exists out there, but yeah, I mean, we've got some tooling that I think we're working on. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely it's definitely challenging because I mean, there's identifying the type of credential, the badge technology that's in use. That's obviously usually step one, right? Looking at the badge, if we can get visual on the badge itself, find some sort of, the markings with the blue markings in the bottom left corner of hid, it'll usually suggest what type of credential type or is in use, whether it's SEOS, and then there's additional markings that'll say if it's some sort of like dual frequency or dual class badge, like SEOS and procs, SEOS and I class, SEO with I class and procs, or MyFair. There's DeskFire. There's a few variants, and then attacking the badge implementation itself, right? Sometimes with some clients, you'll have the high frequency badge and the low frequency side to it. Typically, or at least the majority of the times, the low frequency credential material is used to authenticate, especially the context of like multi-tenant buildings. The LF material is used to get into like, the front door of the building, but a lot of the client suites are protected by whatever's on the high frequency side of the cards. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, right? Especially when you're going into a lot of physicals, you're going into a blind, right? It's a very black box approach. Sometimes on most occasions with physicals, we try to ask the client what type of badges you're using in advance, just because we have, I mean, as you can see, I have like 4 Pelican toolkits behind me of all sorts of crap. I try to save them money because once you go past the second check bag, it's like $200 a bag or $400 round trip. So I try to bring the things that we need for the job and nothing. But yeah, then there's some occasions where they're like, no, bring everything, figure it out yourself. So that's definitely challenging. But
Yeah. I was just going to say that I think was one of the hardest parts of the most recent physical that we were on, is going with multiple panels, knowing that there's going to be different types of badges, having like standard I class keyed into the high frequency reader, but then also getting, not necessarily good reads off of things. You
Yeah.
don't necessarily know when you're looking at a good read versus a bad read. And, I think we can write tools that will take the YGAN data and be able to use the parity to validate, hey, this is a valid facility code. Because, if we're out there for, an hour or two and we've got a bunch of unclear data, I think, being able to sort through that, and ultimately, I feel like we typically do end up with a valid badge, just might take some time to determine which one is actually going to be valid. And I think speeding up that process would save us, an
Yeah.
enormous amount of time. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it wasn't until like I think the last day or the second to last day, we're like, oh crap, that badge would have gotten us in the building had we tried at this door.
Yeah, not to mention a few card numbers over, we can get into every single door in the whole building.
Yeah, that was. Did you
Wow.
like you? Yeah. So Rob, Thomas, we should have bought lottery tickets right after what Thomas pulled off there. Like he played like RFID roulette. Like,
Yeah, I
spinning the
love
wheel.
anytime I get on a physical, anytime I get a badge into the flipper, I just will go to the most sensitive room
force
that
it.
I can go to and brute force, because, you assume there's probably going to be some sequential badge IDs.
Yeah.
And, if I have to be there for too long, then leave, right? But man, we got
Dude, it
into
took
this
4
door in
seconds.
20, it was
I heard
maybe
4
like
beeps.
12 seconds.
Beep,
Yeah,
beep,
4
beep,
beeps.
beep,
It was
bing.
it was very short, and we determined
awesome.
afterwards that was, a fire department keyed badge. So
So has that
I
ever
think
gotten you
that
guys caught brute forcing like that?
I've been caught one time doing brute forcing, but it wasn't somebody who actually validated that I was a pen tester. They're just like, huh, what's going on over here?
Just checking
And
the doors.
I think like Usually it's pretty noisy inside a SOC, so it's a last resort. But if you can go and do that and then leave with valid badge data without being stopped, and then you have a valid badge that you can pass to somebody else, that's value. That's really high value, because people won't really understand, why did I get a bunch of like bad reads and then one good one? They're not going to think, oh, that badge is now compromised necessarily, because a lot of the people who are working in these SOCs, they're not from a technical background, right? Like, they're not working with the technical teams. They have more of a physical security background, and I think, that's weird.
Usually, you find that those badge scans happen so quickly, or at least on the logs, like it's like a little sliver of their UI where
Yeah.
the log entries are appearing, and if it's like if it's like a skyscraper in New York City, right? These things are just flying past, where their ability to actually notice and detect it is slim to none, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like out in the suburbs of middle America, it's obviously, you don't have as much volume per se. So you're more than likely to get caught. Yeah, we were with a very advanced client with a very good security posture, and
Yeah.
they busted us, which is
Yeah.
it was definitely interesting. Yeah, we had our little decoy readers, right? I don't know if the camera can see this or not. So it looks like yeah, it's the blur or the focus on my camera. Yeah, it looks like a real reader, right? They look like real HID readers. This one says "present badge here" at the top. And yeah, they have magnets on the back, so you can just stick them on, a piece of metal, next to the real badge reader. And the idea is to essentially get the employees to put their badges up to it. And, we try to entice them some way, shape, or form. New reader, new reader, stand badge here, training it for whatever reason. And in this case, it came down to that, like, if you see something, say something, which I think
We
was
had
baked
one
in.
guy.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that also had to do with, like, the region in which we did this physical. It's just baked into that culture there. If you see something, you say something. And the guy said something, and because of that, the security started looking at footage and noticed me, and I got a WhatsApp from the clients. Hey, by the way, nice shirt. Here's our security team found you. Like, oh, great, but they haven't found Thomas yet, so let's keep
They
going.
had a good photo of Brandon. We were like, okay, maybe we're fine. Next day, we're going in. They have a photo of me too, and they're like, by the way, there's going to be undercover cops here, and so we're like,
Whoops.
okay, seems like this might be a good time for us to call things
Gonna
off.
assume breach.
Yeah, we were about to walk up on the property, and then we're like, oh, hey, they have a photo of you guys.
Literally, we're
both, and
driving
there's
there,
cops.
like
And we're
right
like, all
down the
right,
street.
good thing you guys texted us now. This seems like the right time for us to stop.
Yeah,
Pulled
it
off
could have
in
gone.
handcuffs.
Yeah.
That would have been a first for us in the team. But no, in the end, it went really well. The client's very happy, and as long as the client's happy, that's what matters, right?
Yeah.
We were here to emulate their greatest adversary, and that's exactly
That
what we try. It's
that
exactly
plus
what we
me
did.
walking away from another on-site without handcuffs on my wrists. That makes me happy as well.
Yeah.
So
No, it was good.
far, perfect record of not being arrested during an engagement. So
Yep, and we're gonna keep it that way.
we're gonna keep it that way.
Yeah, we're gonna keep it that way. But yeah, definitely some lessons learned, right? Especially now, looking at how we can improve our badge capture technology, the tooling around that. Right now, we obviously have these RP40 readers. I've already went ahead and started sourcing additional readers off of eBay. They're like $20 each, where we're then gonna, stick our hardware implants behind it. That will give us the ability to emulate all sorts of readers and capture that WAGAN data. And yeah, because at the end of the day, your SCOS badges or your DeskFire badges, whatever. But if you're not implementing this technology correctly behind the scenes, like, for example, you could have great badge technology that encrypts the communications between your badges and the readers. But if there's nothing protecting the line of communications between the readers and your access control panel themselves, what's stopping an attacker from taking a Phillips screwdriver, taking the thing off the wall, inserting a man-in-the-middle intercept behind, on the cables right behind to intercept that WAGAN data, which is unencrypted, and then just pulling threads that way, right?
And that's what we
I'm
did on
pretty
my last
confident.
physical.
How'd that go?
It went really
Nice.
good. I mean, we basically used the ESP key. So
Yeah.
we found out that they weren't even using cards. They were all using their mobile devices to badge in. So we couldn't even skim or anything. So we had to fall back to that basically. But the client was very, very impressed when we walked over and just like pressed a button on the phone and the door just opened.
Transmit.
Nice. Were you able to clone to badges in that case, or was it just not
Yeah,
necessary?
we
Okay.
collected like
Yeah.
60 or 70 actual badges. So we pretty much
And they
had
took
all the good ones.
the readers would take low frequency as well, huh?
Yeah, I think
See,
so.
this is the thing. Like, that's the thing that I feel now very confident telling basically anybody who is manning a physical security program is if you paid all the money for these dual class cards,
Use them.
ditch the low frequency at the very least for sensitive rooms, right? Like if you got like a data center and you've got low frequency accepted all around the campus, at least in the data center, upgrade that reader to only support high frequency because you
Yeah.
don't want people just cloning a badge from YGAN data they pull off with an ESP key.
And also roll over to OSTP just to mitigate the use of an ESP key to begin with, because then that'll encrypt the comms between the readers and the panels themselves. So that way an ESP key is no longer effective.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
definitely
then
a
of
lot
course
of
hire
lessons
us
learned.
to make sure that we you did it right because
Yes. Just don't send send 8 police cars
Yeah.
looking for us. But yeah, on this last one, I forgot to put it on my hand. You know, I have a little microchip in my left hand. I call it the open sesame trick, just walking up, just like waving the hand. I remember I did an assessment with Alith back in October. And yeah, we did our walkthrough. I was like, hold on, let's see if this works at the data center. Wave my hand, the door clicks open, and everyone's like, huh? That's crazy. Only 4 people have access to this. And the guy like calls downstairs. I'm like, here, call downstairs to your security desk. See whose badge that was. So the guy he calls and he goes, hey, whose badge was that? And I guess the person downstairs was like, it was yours, sir.
That's awesome.
I didn't realize, but I guess like I got this guy's badge on like the first day twice, like once in the morning, one in the afternoon. And I obviously decided to use that because I've never taught the same one twice. And it just happened to be one of the 4 people that had access to that room, which, yeah.
I mean, like we're all physical enjoyers or at least physical doers here. Like, is there more of a rush than the tactile experience of opening a door without even touching it with credentials that you harvested somewhere, right? Like
Yeah,
that feeling of just walking up to a door, no contact, and the door unlocks. Just, it feels so powerful. It's very fun.
I just think there's no greater high than just like walking into a place where you do not belong. Especially when we're like blending in, like, you know, we buy their t-shirts online or source them from eBay, or in this case, we went to Old Navy, bought the shirts, got the emblem, went to some like hat embroidery place at the mall and just made our own.
See, I think I have to maintain my internal fight or flight response whenever I'm in that scenario. Otherwise, I'd be bad at breaking into places. You know what I mean?
You gotta
I
do
have
cold
to be
plunges.
afraid. Yeah, I have to
just
operate with a little
walking
bit of
around
fear.
sweating, just like, is anyone staring at me?
Don't look at me. I'm normal.
Yeah, that's my secret trick, for the record. Cold plunges. It just like helps you regulate that adrenaline rush. So when you are put in that position, it's just like, yeah, like the guy said, he goes, I don't know how you did it. You just walked around so comfortably. I'm like, yeah, just like another day at the office. I don't know.
We did. The compliment that we got, I think, was being called professional criminals.
Yes.
Which, you know, I like to think of us as professional criminals in a sense.
It's like when someone says, you guys are hackers. Like, no, we are cybersecurity professionals.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, I guess this is the end of this month's Red Team podcast. We look forward to speaking with all you guys and hearing all the latest and greatest of whatever it is, you know, we're working on here at Bishop Fox next month. My name's Brandon, joined by Rob and Thomas, and we will speak to you next month.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Later.
Bye, everyone.